following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it is Saturday, and we are talking about money. It's the answer about money. Traditionally, this time of year, there's three things that I do. One is I talk about the past year and what's going on and how I did in terms of projecting what was going to happen. Two, looking forward into 2019 and projecting what I believe is going to happen in 2019. And three, this is the day that I talk about the day that will live in infamy. December the 7th, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Silver and Roberta Wallenstein wrote a book called The PH Warning, the Pearl Harbor Warning and Decision. And a lot of that is based, or a lot of this program is based on that book, because it was very, very peculiar. And I think it serves almost every year as a reminder of what we're going through. Someday I hope we have a year which is just boring as can be, and I'll forget about the December 7th talk. But anyway, what happened at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th was a great surprise, but it shouldn't have been. It should not have been. Had people really been looking at it realistically, the attack on Pearl Harbor should not have been a surprise attack. We knew that Japan was looking at expansion of their country. They were already looking at China and Southeast Asia. They had sent their troops into China. They had invaded China. They were looking at Southeast Asia, and we assumed that their expansion plans were headed toward Asia, into China, into Southeast Asia. We sent, however, most of our fleet from San Diego was transferred to Hawaii. So most of the ships for the Pacific were already at Pearl Harbor at the time the attack would take place. Already, the Japanese had a code called Purple, and that code had been broken. We understood 97% of it by August of that year. We could listen in to their communications, from the land communications to the ships and from the ships back to land. We could listen to all those communications. But something happened in mid-November. In mid-November, there was total radio silence. The assumption was that the ships, the Japanese ships, the Japanese Navy, the Japanese aircraft carriers were all close to home. They were all close to Japan. And that meant that they were probably looking at something in Asia. It meant the entire fleet of Japanese ships had essentially disappeared from our reconnaissance. It was actually a concern. What was going on in Japan was a concern to the U.S., and the U.S. began preparation in case there was something coming from Japan. That's why we sent all those ships to Pearl Harbor. We wanted to be ready just in case. But we were also concerned, the U.S. was also concerned that there were 80,000 Japanese nationals who lived in Hawaii. It was not just military. They were people that had been born there, that had grown up there. They were Japanese who were Japanese Americans. And they were living in Hawaii. So the decision was made to begin to prep for sabotage. So they were concerned about the radio stations being blown up, the pineapple farms, the dairy farms. It wasn't just military. They wanted to prepare everything in the event of Japanese sabotage, Japanese national sabotage from Hawaii sabotaging. So what they did is they lined up all the planes, all the aircraft, wingtip to wingtip. Just exactly what you do not want to do from an attack from outside. You put all your planes all together in one spot and you line them up as close together as you can possibly do. And you take your ships and you put them stem to bow so that all your ships are compacted into a place as small as it can get. And if we'd felt that Japan was mobilizing, looking at where they were going and what was happening, the idea was that they were looking at Russian territory or UK territories or China or into Southeast Asia. They never believed that Japan would view the United States as being inevitable into World War II. What really happened is we were confusing the unfamiliar with the improbable. We weren't familiar with what was going on, so we confused the unfamiliar with the improbable. That's the lesson of Pearl Harbor. The Japanese fleet, it was the size of 6 football fields. Think about that. If you've been to a Seahawks game recently, you know what the size of a football field is. That fleet was the size of 6 football fields. We didn't have satellites. We didn't have reconnaissance flights. So we didn't have that kind of warning. All we had was listening into the code, listening to the communications, but they weren't communicating anything. That fleet set sail from Japan, a size of 6 football fields, as I mentioned, and it made a straight line toward Alaska. And as it was partway there, they made a 45-degree detour and headed straight to Hawaii, right through all the blind spots in the American protection. We were unfamiliar with the improbable, and the Japanese moved to Pearl Harbor. They found our planes in a very tight spot where they could bomb most of the planes. They found the ships stem to stern to, anyway, you got it, stem to stern. And they were able to attack Pearl Harbor, the day that Franklin Roosevelt called the day that will live in infamy. And I believe that we tend to do that in the market. We tend to confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. Prior to 2007, the best investment you could make, people said, was your house. The fact is, we learned a lesson. We learned that the unfamiliar, we confused it with the improbable. It was improbable that all those houses should be foreclosed. That was something that was unfamiliar. So we made the assumption that it wouldn't happen. We built collateralized mortgage obligations with the idea that we would have some margin of safety, a 5% margin of safety. Nowhere did you expect that not only would a carpenter in Cleveland default on his house, and a dentist in Sacramento, and an engineer in Houston, all of them would default on their homes at the same time. The collateralized mortgage obligations were set up so that a carpenter in Cleveland, if they lost their home, would be no huge impact. Or a dentist in Sacramento, or an engineer in Houston, or a banker in Raleigh, North Carolina. Instead, we confused the unfamiliar with the improbable. Who would have imagined that? People said that period of time from FDIC formation in the 1930s to 2007, those 70 plus years were the golden age of economics. We didn't have any bank runs. We didn't have any bank panics. No one got confused. Then we confused the unfamiliar with the improbable. We've done that any number of times. Travel agents, newspapers. You can make a long list of companies, the bus companies who could have dominated transportation. Instead, today, do you ever see a Greyhound or a Trailways bus? Not very often. I mentioned that once on the radio, and then on the way home, sure enough, there was a Trailways bus right in front of me. They could have dominated. Newspapers could dominate. Instead, there's fewer newspapers in Seattle. There's now one daily newspaper instead of two, and it seems to get smaller and smaller almost every week. Travel agents. Used to see a travel agent on almost every street corner. Used to see 6 or 8 or 10 in the malls. Now it's hard to find a travel agent. There's a few that left that are still specialists. But in each one of those industries, we begin to confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. We're in a bull market right now, a secular bull market. It's been going since 2009. And if you've been listening to the program for a long time, I've been projecting that we've got a long way to run. Don't confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. And in this case, we have a historical record. We have a historical record, and we're going to be talking more about some of the things where it's easy to confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. So don't go away. We're coming to a commercial break, and I'll be right back after the commercial break to lay out a few more of these areas which you need to be aware of. Stay with me, and we've got a great guest today, too. You want to hear what he has to say. Be right back.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
Welcome back. I've been talking about not confusing the improbable with the unfamiliar, or vice versa, confusing the unfamiliar with the improbable. And as we sit in this time when the market is up 600 in one day and down 700 in the next day, and then down another 700, and then reverses and is down only 29, as we sit in these times of volatility, there's a lot of things that are going on, some which are apparent, some which are not apparent. And as I listen to CNBC, and the screen is going all day long in my office, and I listen to some of these people, a lot of people are trying to rationalize after the fact what's going on. It's really a time in which it's one of those times when you shouldn't confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. You know, somebody asked me today about, one of my clients asked me today, because I'd read a Bloomberg story, right? When I say today, I'm getting a little confused. That was actually Thursday of this past week. They asked me about the inverted yield curve. They'd read an article on Bloomberg about the inverted yield curve. And I said, I'd ask, have you read the e-letter that I wrote 6 or 8 months ago? I wrote about the bond vigilantes, a term that I had not heard for almost 20 years. Back when I got into the business in the 1980s, there was a lot of talk about the bond vigilantes. It was not a group of individuals who had formed into a posse to go after the bad guys. These were just bond traders and bond brokers who looked at the yield curve. The yield curve is that curve when you plot the short-term interest rates against the long-term interest rates. They looked at the yield curve because when short rates went up and increased over and above long-term rates, usually you had a recession. Samuelson, in his economics book, one of the most popular economics book ever published back in the 50s and 60s, whenever it was, made a comment about the stock market, that the stock market has correctly predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. I can use the same phrase for the yield curve. The yield curve has correctly predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. Think about it. 9 of the last 5. So yes, the yield curve, when it inverts, can indicate that there's bad times ahead. But it hasn't always been. And if you count on that, you're going to be misled. You're going to confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. And today, those times going back to the last time we had inverted yield curves, going back to the 1980s and the 1970s, that's been a long time ago. So most people that are running money, that are managing money accounts, that are in this market, have never lived through an inverted yield curve. And so I was surprised after 20 years or whatever it was to hear people talking about the bond vigilantes. It's a term that I hadn't heard for a long, long time. And yeah, there's some validity to it. When the yield curve flattens, it could mean that we're headed toward a recession. But there's a lot of other reasons for the yield curve to flatten. Don't confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. I believe, and I've been talking for 10 years about a secular bull market, similar to the market from 1982 to 2000. All the fundamentals are there for it to be there. The fundamentals for a recession are not there. No matter what people say, no matter what people do, it's not there. One of the things that they're talking about is oil prices have dropped, and that has been another indication of a recession. We're going to talk about that later in the program and talk about why oil prices are dropping, and in my opinion, why I believe you're going to see oil prices not only drop, but they're going to continue to stay at this level, maybe for a decade or more. That's coming later in the program. We'll revisit that. But right now, we're in a secular bull market. And secular bull markets, as Howard Marks once said, you can prepare, you can't predict, but you can prepare. John Templeton said, bull markets are born on pessimism, they grow on skepticism, they mature on optimism, and they die on euphemism. We're not even at the euphemism phase yet. We're not at a point. And yet, there's funny things going on. One of the interesting articles recently in Investment News talked about money managers, and this year they've done so poorly, they're not going to get bonuses, or a lot of them are not expecting bonuses. And that set this whole pessimistic outset in their minds. Some of those bonuses are huge. They may not get any bonus this year. How terrible. I mean, they might not be able to take their vacation to South America or to do a world cruise. You know, makes you really sad, huh? Anyway, don't confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. From the mile-high view, we're still in this process that I've been talking about with a supercycle where worldwide growth is much higher than average. We're going to continue to see that. And even with some slowdown from time to time in that growth rate, we're still going to continue to see it, even with a very limited trade war. That could affect the United States, that could affect China, that could affect some Europe. But fundamentally, something's going on that is driving the world economy, and that's the growth of the middle class. By 2030, the prediction is 93% of the middle class will live in emerging nations. They're moving from subsistence of raising their own food, of making their own clothes, to being consumers, buying lattes, buying cars, buying smartphones. They're moving that direction, and that drives the economy. There's nothing in what's been going on in the last 2 or 3 months with all this volatility that seems in any way that it's going to derail and push those people back into poverty. We have something going on we've never seen before, and that's the number of middle-class people in this world. Not in the U.S., 93% in emerging nations. You know, already some countries have a greater middle class in terms of number of people than the population of the U.S. We're going to continue to see. economics grow worldwide. Doesn't mean the stock markets worldwide are the best place to be, but that's a different subject. Don't confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. Anyway, with that said, I want to turn our attention to my guest for today, Joe Schwab of Uniplex Construction. Welcome to the program, Joe.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we start with your background? Tell us about your background.
Well, I grew up locally here in Seattle. Grew up in a construction company, was third generation. Grandfather was kind of a handyman. He moved around a number of times. Father learned a lot from my grandfather, and he came out of college and was in the insurance industry as an adjuster. Started his own business, brought me up in that business. I've been in and around construction sites my entire life. Went through school here locally, finished up at Gonzaga University in Eastern Washington, and decided to join the small at that time family business. And we've been growing for years and years since, and become the company we are today, Uniplex Construction.
Gonzaga has a little basketball team, huh?
You seem to be doing all right this year. Yeah, been real fun to watch.
Has been. So let's talk about what's going on in your business. Tell us about Uniplex.
Uniplex Construction, we purchased that company at the end of, I'd say, the last downturn, and it sort of evolved from a residential construction company that had to survive the last recession. And in order to do that, we started working in the commercial arena, really helping companies who were downsizing themselves. And as they got into new spaces, most of their leases came with carpet, rubber base, and paint, and we did lots of that. And it kept the lights on. And as we got really proficient at that and started getting bigger opportunities, that residential company really couldn't handle the new work that was coming in very well. So we purchased Uniplex Construction to be the commercial arm. It had some great success, started growing really rapidly, and actually ended up sort of enveloping the residential company at one point, combined the two. And again, we've had 6 years now of just incredible growth in this region.
When you think about commercial and residential, those seem like two very different approaches to the owners of the real estate. Tell us about that.
They're vastly different.
How do you accomplish that?
Yeah. Residentially, not only different from the owner standpoint, but even, the people who manage those projects, the people who work on those projects, all the trade partners you bring in, they're all vastly different. Residential clients, they're really spending their hard-earned money. They may have saved it for years and decades to do whatever they need to do to, what potentially might be, and you mentioned this before, maybe one of their biggest investments. And those who've held them on long enough, they went through the same downturn that we all did, and the real estate bust, and that's all come back. But that money is very important to them, and they're going to look every single day that they come home from work and see how their money's being spent, and probably send you a handful of questions every night. Commercial, again, a little bit different. They are really looking at how to maximize their investment. And so they're trying to figure out how to put money into their investments, make sure that they can get a return on that investment. So whether it's increased rents or reduced losses or reduced vacancies, all those things are what they're looking at. And they come in and they look at, are you on time, are you on budget, and were they able to get the dollars back out?
So two very different approaches, and yet you've combined those approaches to a company which is growing very rapidly in this. We're coming to a commercial break, so we're going to talk about how you did that. Once we come back from commercial break, we're going to talk about real estate and commercial markets and what's going on in Seattle. We're going to come back to all those things, so don't go away. We've got a lot to cover. Want to finish up with not confusing the unfamiliar with the improbable. We've got a lot of things to cover today. Don't go away. We've got so much to say.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Joe Schwab of Uniplex Construction. We just started to touch on the base. They have a company with residential and commercial side, and they're one of the most successful companies in Seattle. So you got to know that they're growing very fast, not just because real estate is doing well, but because of their approach. So we're going to hear more about their approach and what it is. So back with you, Joe. We just started to touch on having different approaches for commercial and residential on a normal basis, but you've combined those. Tell us about that.
Well, we actually have 3 divisions within the company. So we've got a residential division that does your standard remodels and additions and custom homes for folks. We've got the commercial division that does a lot of TI, tenant improvement work around the city. We're in everything from office spaces to medical to restaurants. And we even have a restoration division, which is really an insurance restoration division that's there to help our clients when they have a loss, whether it's a fire or water-related loss. And so bringing all 3 of those together is a challenge. Very few companies have that much diversification within. We've been successful in doing it. Those divisions are all very, very separate within the company. And all of those divisions are run by folks who, at one time or another, ran their own specialized business within that division. So every one of our senior project managers has run their own successful business prior to joining us. And most of them joined us because they just hit that ceiling that so many contractors hit. They can only get so big, they can only wear so many hats, they can only work so late at night, and they just have a hard time getting over that hump and being able to afford and have a team to help diversify, their tasks within the company. So we've been able to bring a bunch of folks together, which took some talent and a lot of discussions and a lot of recruiting, and of course a little bit of money. But we were able to bring all those folks together and give them great homes to do their business.
So, which brings up another point, because when you look at what's going on in a lot of the industries around Seattle and around the country, there's a shortage of employees, a shortage of people. The average carpenter, I understand, is 62 years of age, and not many entering the business. So you've been able to acquire talent, been able to acquire people, and keep the people working for you. They don't just jump to another company for an extra couple bucks an hour. So tell us how you do that.
Well, it's an incredible challenge, and we saw that developing, easily a decade ago. We were seeing our own talent within our company when we were much smaller, and seeing that the real talent was going to age out, and a lot of it is physical related work. You can only do it so long. So we started, easily a decade ago, bringing in younger folks, not even necessarily out of the trade schools, but bringing in younger folks who were looking for opportunities, had a work ethic, and we've been training them from within. Now, once you train those folks, now they're valuable to somebody else. Right. And, we make sure that we of course, pay everybody a competitive wage. But, construction's known for potentially using the folks in the field as a commodity almost. And we look at it 100% different. Without them, they're our greatest sales folks. Once we sell a project and they're out there doing the work, they're the ones selling really our next 3 projects. They're the ones that are helping us get those fantastic reviews. So we've got to create a great place for them to work. And so we treat them, of course, with a lot of respect. We really look at them as artisans, and we want them to have a great place to do what it is that they're great at, and to be able to be proud of what they're doing. At the end of the day, still, they've got to put food on the table and take care of their families. So we've got competitive wages. And when one of our competitors or another company or another opportunity comes along that may be worth $1 or $2 more, we've created a culture where they feel valued. We're very family-oriented. We're very flexible with people to make sure that they can take care of what they need to take care of at home. If they don't have everything handled there, how are they ever really going to be able to focus and put their best foot forward at work? So we really help them with that. And beyond the $1 or $2 that they can get an hour somewhere else, a lot of them have worked for us long enough that they've seen the ups and downs in the market. And what we've done is we've given them consistency. Having those 3 divisions really helps with that. When one division's up, maybe another one's down, it all balances out. We keep the guys busy. And again, beyond that, we've got fantastic benefits packages. We've got, the medical, the dental, and that's kind of a big deal in construction. We also take care of these guys to make sure that no matter how much or how little they may be making working with us, we're helping them towards their futures. And we're literally looking for a long-term vision and view from them. So, we do a 401k program where we not only, have it and they have the ability to invest in it, but we take automatically 3% of anything that they earn, a calculation, and we put that in. That's not out of their pockets. It's not taking away from the money that they're making, but we're above and beyond what they earn. We're putting into a 401k. We also, at the end of each year, we take a percentage of all of our profits and we redistribute that to all the guys. That helps them really take a lot of pride in what they're doing, keep their efficiency up, because they know all that money that adds to our profits really adds to their retirement plan. And lastly, we even have a pension plan. So we put money in consistently for the guys, and it invests over time. And those that don't stay with us a long period of time, they leave some of that money behind for the rest. But all of those things combined create a company where the guys really want to be and they really want to stay. And as far as recruiting and getting new ones, that word spreads. We've had great growth, so we've gotten some great media exposure, for the company. But as well, the existing employees we have, you look at reviews we have online for Glassdoor, they love where they work. They know that the company really cares about them. And our whole goal is that should you age out or retire or have an injury or whatever, if you've been with us for a full career, you will have a retirement that we've created for you and put money away for you so that you actually can do that.
It's pretty amazing. That explains a lot of the growth, too. Let's shift gears a minute and talk about the Seattle area and what's going on real estate-wise here, both on the commercial and residential area.
Yeah, that's been a real hot button lately. Everybody wonders if the end is near. And everyone's been talking about that for the last couple of years, and everyone keeps trying to set a deadline. Be done by this time. Have your money back in by this date. This time next year, everything's going to change. Most recently, everyone has seen what's being coined as the cooling of the real estate market in Seattle. And the real estate market in Seattle was going up at a ridiculously fast pace, double digits every year. Neighborhoods just, prices were quick, and everybody who's listening to the show is well aware of that. We may have seen that sort of top out a bit about the middle of this last summer. And as far as the cooling, I would say that sellers were getting greedier and greedier, trying to get more and more, and we had a lot of new folks coming into this market, some of them from other pretty expensive markets. They were worried that the pace of at which real estate was growing, that no matter what somebody was selling something for, they needed to get it. They needed to buy it. Well, we finally saw that sort of balance out about the middle of the summer. And the cooling, I think, is that we just aren't seeing it rush up so fast. We aren't seeing the bidding wars. But I wouldn't say that we're at all at a point where I see any reason why that housing market is going to start to devalue. We may go from double-digit growth to single-digit growth in residential. Some factors that are going to keep that healthy, all the major employers in our area, and we all know the names of them, they're all looking at expansions. They're all hiring. They're all building new buildings. They're all leasing new buildings. Some of them are doing billion-dollar renovations of their existing to bring in more employees. So that's going to continue to bring more folks in and continue to have that supply and demand challenge that we have here in Seattle.
Talking about that, Seattle is one of the least dense housing cities in the country. How does that impact what's going on?
Well, when we're talking about supply and demand, and us being one of the larger cities now in the nation, I don't think it was that way when I was here as a kid, but we're definitely there now. And looking at our habits, really. If you look at a grid map of Seattle and you look at all of the excuse me, I'm losing my train of thought here, but if you look at all the zoning, you're going to see that we have all through the center of the city, all single family. Everybody wants their yard, their single family dwelling, and their white picket fence. Well, the city is outgrowing that. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, it's changing. And in order for the city of Seattle to continue to work on their affordable housing challenges and things like that, there are going to have to be some neighborhoods that one of these days get redeveloped into a different type of housing so that we can house more people at an affordable rate.
Well, we're coming up to the end of the time we have together. If someone wants to get a hold of you, and if they have a project, either commercial or residential or a TI project, how would they do that?
There's two great ways. The first is just call the office. There's always somebody there ready to take your call. The phone number is 206-323-4320. The other way is to get on your computer or your phone and look us up at uniplexconstruction.com, and that'll point you right to a whole bunch of great ways to get a hold of us.
Say those again. So if
the phone number is 206-323-4320. Website Uniplex, UNIPLEX, construction.com.
Sounds great. Thanks for being on the show. And if you, the listener, do have a project, call Uniplex. I mean, there's a reason why they're growing as fast as they are. It's poor, sloppy workmanship, poor, sloppy building doesn't grow very fast, at least in Seattle. So anyway, if you have a project, do give Uniplex a call. Give Joe a call.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Mike.
And thanks for being on. Thanks for telling us about Uniplex. We're going to shift gears as we come up to this commercial break. After the commercial break, I want to shift and talk about one of those areas where it's easy to confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. And don't get caught on the wrong side, because this is an investment theme. Stay with us. We've got a lot to cover in this area, and I think for most people, it'll be a significant awakening. I don't know. I think most of the people will hear about this and yet don't really understand the impact it's having. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Don't go away.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So Thanksgiving week just passed. A couple of weeks ago, Thanksgiving week. What happened in the market Thanksgiving week was the worst week since the 1930s. It was the worst Thanksgiving week since Franklin Roosevelt was president and his administration was in power. That's a long time ago. That's not quite 100 years, unless you're a poor mathematician. But it's been a long time. So what happened? The market was up 600, down 700, up 800. The market was all volatile, and that's continued since then. In my opinion, it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment, the biggest part of which is the largest industry in the world. And it's having a very positive impact in many ways. The Bush-era tax cuts were the largest tax cuts ever passed, regardless of what this current administration says. The Bush-era tax cuts were the largest ever passed. It saved the average American family $315 a year. The changes that are going on right now are saving the average American family $1,750, and it's probably going to increase. That's the impact of what's going on. And what is that? Oil prices have dropped from $76 a barrel to $51. The energy industry is a $7 trillion per year industry. If you compare that, we're on the radio. If you compare that to media, to newspapers, books, televisions, movies, everything you can think of in terms of media, the media industry is $1 trillion a year, 1/7 the size of the energy industry. And as I've talked over these past 10 years on the radio, I've talked about what's happening in disruption, what's happening in the energy industry, and we're beginning to see it. We're beginning to see what could be called a seismic revolution, a disruptive change. It's not just the renewables and the green energy. Yes, that's having an impact, a significant impact. But the biggest difference right now is fracking. Most people have heard of fracking. Most people have read about fracking. But most people don't understand what it is and what the implications are. I hope by the end of today's program, you'll understand the implications, you'll understand what it is, and what the impact is, and why I'm saying this volatility we're seeing in the market is a positive thing, not a negative thing. For the current time and for probably the next 10 years, America is leading the way. A lot of this information is coming from a book called The Absent Superpower, which talks about drilling and other things. But I want to really focus down on fracking. If you look at conventional drilling of oil, what's been going on for over 100 years. The way you conventionally drill for oil is you put a shaft down into the earth and you drill down hundreds to thousands of feet, maybe even into miles. And you drill down till you reach a pool of oil. And you begin to extract that out. You pull it or you force the liquid to the surface, and then you truck it off or you put it into freight cars and run it off. Fracking turns that on its head. Most petroleum comes, to understand fracking, you have to understand what petroleum is. Most petroleum comes from long dead plankton and algae. Those dead plankton and algae, those little one-cell substances, or living things, 1-2 cells, living things, they sink, when they die, they sink to the bottom of a body of water. And they mix with bacteria there. They mix with bacteria, they mix with mud, and through that process, they begin to form a substance, a waxy substance called kerogen. And as that mud continues to pile on, as things continue to push it down, you begin to force that kerogen into the earth. And as that's pushed down, you begin to build pressure, and that pressure actually turns the kerogen into petroleum. Some of it into little tiny bits, some bits not much bigger than a micron in size, not much bigger than the width of a hair. And those bits form in, most of the times, a lot of times, into shale rock. Some of those, with the amount of pressure building up, the geological pressure in the Earth's surface, and over hundreds and thousands and millions of years, it's forced into pools, and those pools then become conventionally what we drill into, and that's conventional drilling. But the large majority of those petroleum droplets, or little bits of petroleum, they never make it into a pool. Estimates say that over 90% of petroleum never migrates into those pools. Over 90% of the petroleum is not available by conventional drilling. However, those little droplets become the basis of fracking. Extracting those little pockets of petroleum is something which the analogy that the absent superpower makes is like going into lasagna, different layers. Whereas conventional drilling is stabbing into ravioli, fracking is like being in lasagna. You don't drill down, you drill horizontally, level with the ground. You go down a few hundred feet and then you drill level with the ground and you begin to extract. It's not enough just to drill a hole. You have to force those little bits of petroleum out. And you do that by running millions of gallons of water mixed with salt. And that forces those droplets of petroleum into your piping, and you push, with a great deal of pressure, you push all that back out to the surface, and you fill those little tiny holes with sand. The advantage is you're dealing with petroleum that's less contaminated. In those big pools of petroleum, some become very, very contaminated. They become what are called very heavy crude oil. Some becomes light crude oil, but they become contaminated with sulfur and with other products. What happens with the petroleum that's fracked out is it's a very light petroleum, very, very pure, and a lot of it is natural gas. Now, if you think about natural gas, it's a gas. That's why they call it a natural gas. Now, it might not brilliant there. If you want to cook a turkey, it would take that natural gas the size of a walk-in closet. Natural gas has to be compressed, and so you end up with liquid natural gas. Liquid natural gas burns a lot cleaner, a lot nicer, and the turbines that generate electricity can be turned on and off. So whereas solar and wind works only during the daytime or during wind time, natural gas works around the clock, or can work around the clock, and in conjunction with solar. Solar and wind now account for 7 or 8% of production of power that's produced. Add water to that, add the hydro, you get about 17%. But those renewables, as they come on, and they're very efficient and effective, those renewables only work during certain times of the day. Add natural gas to that, and you have a new industry that's really changing the demographics. It's changing what's happening in the future. We're seeing the power of renewables come on with the backup source of natural gas. And fracking is spreading now to the rest of the world. America leads, and it's changing the energy industry. That's pushed oil prices down from 76 to 51, and I believe they'll continue to drop. Think about it. Don't confuse the unfamiliar with the improbable. That wraps up today. I'll be back next week talking about money. If it is Saturday, if it is noon, we are talking about money.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams.